So when Jen's invited me back, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to talk about. I happened to be listening to one of my favourite bands at the time. Some of you may or may not know New Model Army. They've got a song called Stoopid Questions, and that was buzzing around in my head, so I thought, actually, that's vague enough to work with, so let's go with that. What I'm really going to talk about is three main things. I'm going to talk about learning. I think that's something you don't often think about. You go through school and you kind of pick some things up. But the fact you're at this conference probably means you're here to try and learn some new things. And maybe you started to take some views on what sort of things work for you, what sort of things don't. So I'd like to invite you this morning to just chill out. I'm not going to do any deep dives into C++. This is a keynote. I just want a big overview here. Just take a moment to think about how you learn effectively, what sort of things help you. Reflect back on some of the talks you've listened to and think about why they work. Some of the ones that I've enjoyed so far has been Anders talking, and he's come out with some really nice little examples that just fit on 3 or 4 lines of code that I can then hold in my head for days afterwards and think on. And I personally find that really useful. But we're all different. So there's not one true way of learning. This is your moment to think about you and what works for you. I also want to talk about teaching. Obviously, several people are going to do workshops later on, have already given talks or got talks coming up. And I think it's true to say that the majority of people here giving talks have never been taught how to teach. So we've not been taught how to learn, we've not been taught how to teach, and we're kind of blagging this, and we're in this together. So let's learn together. And then the final thread I'm going to pull on, because I did a PhD in this, and it's a passing interest, and though I've tried to use some AI, machine learning things at work, I tend to end up stepping back and making sure we've got CI or some unit tests and the code's easy to work with, because I like to keep things easy. So there we go. There's going to be a little running theme of AI. And loads of people are using Copilot and LLMs and just using that to mean AI at the moment. So it's worth taking a moment to muse on that as well. See whether that's going to change the world or not. Spoiler, probably not. Anyway. I think there's been a lot of hype about LLMs recently, saying, oh, we can get rid of most of our programmers. Have we all seen some incidents of, it might just be a correlation, some outages at some big companies that might have laid off loads of staff and handed things over to AI? Just a data point proves nothing. There's a really good paper on the communications of the ACM that's worth taking time to look at. I've shared the slides with Jens, and I can probably share them on Discord later or something similar. The internet and LLMs have not made learning obsolete. Learning is essential, and it takes time. Now, I'm old enough to have seen things move from people trying to learn from lectures and books to, remember Stack Overflow starting off, and talking to some academics at the time who said, it's terrible, students just copy code off Stack Overflow and submit that as an answer. And it doesn't work, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, they haven't even tried it out. And now you can switch the word Stack Overflow to maybe Reddit, or even maybe LLM-generated code. And it's the same phrase. They've just copied it off the internet. They've just copied it out of an LLM. If you're going to try something out, you need to engage your brain. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad to use Stack Overflow or copy someone else's homework. And that might be the start of learning something. But I think to truly learn, you need to take that extra step. So let's try and explore what some of those extra steps might involve. I said my title was Stoopid Questions, and I deliberately spelt it wrong. I should tell you why later on. Have you ever asked a question during a talk? Now, I know some people have asked questions in some talks, because I've been to some talks and some people have asked questions. That's actually a big thing to do. And to break one of the rules I'm going to introduce later on, so you don't need to put your hand up, but think about it. Is there anyone here who's never asked a question during or at the end of a talk? There probably will be. I did a PhD years ago, and one of the senior guys said to me and the other PhD students, when he'd done a PhD, his supervisor said to him, I want you to ask a question at every talk you go to, which sounded horrifying, and his supervisor made him do that and told him off if he didn't. The thing I got from that was, I imagined what it would be like. What if I had to do that? And since then, whenever I'm at a technical talk, I always try and think of a question. And I've noticed about myself, and this might work for you as well, if you do that, if you say to yourself, right, I'm going to try and ask a question, you engage differently, you listen differently. You might start going, oh, hang on, what if I didn't do that? Or, are you sure that's right? That's one way to make yourself engage. Start thinking of some questions to ask. And the other lists of questions I've put up on the screen. If you think about it, that's the way you can maybe engage with a customer. If you're trying to communicate with someone and check you've got a shared understanding, you can repeat back parrot fashion what they've just said to you. But that doesn't prove that you've understood. It's when you say, no, hang on, what do you want to do under these circumstances? Why have you said that? Or is this really a good idea? How are we going to do it? Once you start unpacking things, that two-way dialogue, that's part of where the understanding and perhaps learning comes from. And then let's zone in a bit more. So I've already said this, really. How many of you have given training courses but never been taught how to teach? That's going to be a lot of people, and that's okay. Have you tried to learn something but not been taught how to learn? I reckon no one's really taught how to learn. You figure it out for yourself. How many of you managed to pass some exams at school despite having the worst teacher in the world? Some of us. At university, I did maths and philosophy. One of the maths lecturers noticed people weren't turning up, so he sent round a register, and you got in trouble if you didn't sign the register. So everybody turned up, the register went round, and we signed it. He stood, wrote on the board for an hour with his back to the class, turned round at the end of the hour, and there's pretty much just me sat there, and he always looked very surprised. But he hadn't noticed when people had left, and I then shared the notes with people, and they bought me a beer, so win-win. But yeah, little tip there about teaching. If you turn your back to the room, you're going to miss some of what's going on. But several of us managed to pass that course, possibly mainly down to me. But there's some hope in there. That means you can learn even if the teacher's bad. And it means if you give a bad talk here, or I give a terrible keynote, I've given you a space to think about things. So that means I can relax and we're all good. Another reason I pulled on the title was I had a book published last year called Learn C++ by Example. I maintain this should have been called Relearn C++ by Example, because that's focused on just getting you up to speed with some salient parts of the newer standards. And I'm currently trying to write an introductory C++ book for O'Reilly. And that is so hard explaining to beginners. And C++ is getting increasingly harder to teach because there's so much to it. But any big topic can be like that. And if you can just pull on some smaller examples, you'll get somewhere. So I've spent a lot of time over the last 4 years or so thinking about how to explain things clearly. I'm not here to sell books. I'm here to give you a space to think about teaching, learning, and some of the AI stuff. I think if you think about how you teach children, you do it by giving them toys to play with, something they can actively engage with, and you try and make things fun. So there's a hint on how to teach and how to learn. You need to be enjoying what you're doing. You need to find something interesting. Go, oh, hang on. What happens if I put this in the other way up? Or what happens if I change this from a signed in to an unsigned in? To play with things, see what happens. Bend or break the rules. Some of this is about imagination. Once we move on from playing and maybe you go to school and do more formal learning, I think a first step in learning is learning things by rote. So if you might have to learn your times tables, you repeat back parrot fashion, all the numbers. My memory is terrible, and I remember getting in trouble at primary school because the teacher could see me thinking and working it out. And I can be quite quick with mental arithmetic when I'm finding patterns. I don't remember 9 nines are 81. I've taken 9 away from 9 tens because we all think differently. So I find it hard to memorize stuff, but some people are really good at this. As a form of learning, be able to repeat things back parrot fashion, I'd maintain that's more about knowledge. You know stuff. You've got some kind of lookup table in your head. That's different from understanding, which is different from wisdom. And there are lots of words here we could unpack and muse on for hours, but I won't. You also sometimes find, and I found this, I said my first job, perhaps I haven't said this yet, my first job was as a secondary school maths teacher. And I've met loads of other people who are teachers, and several people who've taught smaller kids, teach them their tables, teach them how to do subtraction or division. And they say there's one way of doing this. Show you some examples and make you do the same thing over and over. And then when I talk to some people's parents, they say, oh, the children don't do division the way I did division at school. I showed them how I do it, and then they get 0 for their homework because they've done it the wrong way. If you've got the right answer and you've showed your steps, then they shouldn't be getting 0, and that's completely demotivating. There's a reason why that happens. That's because a lot of the teachers have learnt by rote one way of doing things and don't have that understanding part. So if you are going to try and teach, you need to be prepared for somebody to do something differently to you. And if you're a good teacher, you'll be able to roll with that and think on your feet. And you can at least be humble and go, well, hadn't thought of that, that's interesting. While I was teaching, and this is part of why I ended up stopping after 3 years, my head of department, the maths department, said to me once, I hate kids and I hate maths. If there was one job you're going to avoid doing when you don't like children and you don't like maths, you'd think it was that. Apparently she used to be an English teacher, but the drama lessons were too noisy, so she switched subjects. That doesn't explain why she got into teaching in the first place. And despite her, several of the kids managed to get A-level maths and go on to university and do computer studies or similar. But what? But we've all had situations like that, and we cope despite this. So a first secret from somebody who used to be a teacher is a lot of primary school teachers can't do maths. And if you've got children and they're struggling with maths at school, just tell them, might be a bad teacher. It's probably not them. I maintain everyone can do maths and get to enjoy it, but that's maybe I'm biased. So, okay, if you don't learn by rote, and I certainly struggle with this, you can cheat. Anyone going to own up to cheating in an exam? Don't have to put your hands up. But if you think about it, if you do write some notes on your hand, and I've seen people doing this, you've actually put some thought into which bits you find hard to remember and written them down. So I think you deserve some credit for that. Side note, I did a master's in mathematics, which was an open book exam. And those were the hardest exams I've ever done in my life. Anyone else done some open book exams? I can see some heads nodding. And it was completely open, so I was allowed to annotate the books so I could write notes in all the margins. And to begin with, I was busy writing down loads of notes, and I thought, hang on, it's taken me several months to read this book. It's going to take me hours to find the notes. I'm better off just learning how to do this. Resorting to the book for some little details if I need. And having the book there wasn't cheating, actually made it harder. But thinking about what to scribble in the margins engaged my brain. And then I learned a bit about me. I guess another thing, if you think about it, perhaps exams are cheating. Like, you can get 80% in an exam and get a top grade. Woo! Imagine if Anthony's cars were fine 80% of the time, and the other 20% of the time they drove off a bridge or crashed into someone. Would you give it a top grade certificate, best car ever, in the top 1%? Now you go, that is not good enough. So actually, whilst you're learning, just be encouraged. You can get loads of stuff wrong. The important thing is the bits you've learned now how to get right. You don't have to aim for perfection when you're trying to learn something new. Be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up. You aren't putting anyone's life at risk. If you get something wrong, if you stumble over your words, if you get your times tables wrong, that's okay. You can be wrong 1 in 5 times and still be doing brilliantly. Are you cheating if you resort to getting Gen AI to do your essay for you? Or copy something off Stack Overflow? Or quote someone in an article you've read? There's the stages of thought there. I edit Accuse Overload magazine, and the December edition's got an article in, or will have an article in it, about why somebody will not use Gen AI for anything. And there are some environmental questions around that, about the amount of power it's using and similar, but this isn't a talk about sustainability, so I'll just leave that hanging. And take a moment to see how slow I'm being. Okay. So, another way you learn, and that's hence the title of this talk, is by asking those questions. And it is sometimes when you go, hang on, miss, did you mean -1? Or have you forgotten a semicolon? Or something that it's like when I said earlier about engaging your brain with what's happening. And also, like, pro tip for people doing training and teaching, it's really easy to not think through what you're doing and how you're making people feel. It's good to get feedback, and I've asked some questions and got some nods just to get a feel of where people are at and what they do. But I've seen lots of people in training sessions say, hands up if you didn't understand. Who feels confident enough to go, no, I've got no idea what you're talking about? Not many of us. If you're a trainer or a teacher and you say, hands up if you do understand. Several people have put their hand up. And if you watch the room, you might see other people looking around and gradually putting their hand up. And then you've learned something. You've learned that maybe the people who went, maybe, haven't quite got it. Don't call them out. Just you be aware that some people haven't quite followed what you said. But if you ask, who doesn't know what I'm talking about, you're not helping people. And if, as the person who's trying to learn, you're not sure what to ask, try something. Or even, can you repeat that in different words is a good question. Well, here's another good question. What if? And that gets your imagination going. I've been musing lots about AI, and I'm not going to be able to unpack this in a sentence, but I'll try. I think one thing that the Gen AI and LLMs can never do, and that stops them, to my mind, from proving that they're intelligent or can learn, is they can't come out with that counterfactual question that, what if the world were different and we tried this instead? So hang on to those what-if style questions. Get your imagination going. Like I said earlier, try and bend and break the rules, play with things, put things in the wrong place. Go, oh yeah, let's see. It takes a lot of confidence to go, are you sure? Have you missed a semicolon? The famous XKCD of someone being wrong on the internet. And now I see people complaining about LLMs being wrong. Of course they get things wrong. They are just making stuff up. But then again, I sometimes make stuff up and haven't checked my references. So whenever you're interacting with a person or a machine, keep your brain engaged. And you know, sometimes Reddit's wrong. Sometimes Stack Overflow's wrong. Sometimes books have got mistakes in. I don't think there's anything that's completely mistake-free, apart from some mathematical proofs. But we're not here for a maths lecture. Sometimes you get blocked if you're trying to learn. I've talked about who's had terrible teachers, and there was some sage nodding. I struggled with learning foreign languages at school, and I was in the bottom, English class. I'm beginning to suspect I'm dyslexic. In fact, for some of my editorials and articles I've written, I wrote one anonymously once, and one of the guys on the ACU review team said, has Fran written this? Because he recognised me by my typos. So, hey, fame. But despite struggling with language, I found some people that helped me. I think I came to a point where I went, I couldn't do this when I was a child. I got told off, and people say, are you stupid? Which made me think, well, actually, apparently I am. But fortunately, it was like, when it came to some math stuff and some computing stuff, that didn't happen. I could cope with that. But I've learned that things I struggled with as a child, there are different ways of doing it, and I get loads of help from people. So if you've got something that you're afraid of, if you think, no, it's got maths in it, I won't be able to do this, you're different to the person you were half an hour ago even. And you're certainly different to the person you were when you were 14 or 20. Maybe some of you aren't even 20 yet. I didn't check properly. But you know what I mean? Things can change. And it might be something that you'll never be brilliant at, but with a bit of help, you might be able to manage. So have courage. You might be able to do something you thought was impossible. And there might be other things that you go, ugh. So one thing you frequently do if you're teaching maths is to say, show you're working. And that drives loads of children nuts. But the reason I was doing that was to get somebody to not just go, 42. Okay, you got the right answer. What I want to know is how you're thinking. And can you communicate how you're thinking? and your chain of thought. And if you get used to doing that, even if you don't tell someone else, you might suddenly spot one of the steps you're making. It's like, oh, there might be a different way to do this. So that's a useful thing to just slow down. And a side point about LLMs, there's some research out there that if you are going to use this kind of thing, instead of just getting it to generate an answer, say, and show your reasoning, tell me your chain of thought, it slows it down. And then each little random step of what it comes out with next is less likely to move wildly into a hallucination zone. Anecdotes. So aside from blockers, like I said, dyslexia and other neurospicy issues can get in the way, and past experience. If you get stuck, get used to finding ways to get unstuck. Talk to a rubber duck is a common thing, which is like showing you're working or just thinking out loud. Or like, if you got stuck on one problem, hang it, try a simpler one. And the same happens if you get stuck on some software development. If you're trying to make a function work, just take a step back. Write some unit tests and just get it working for n equals 0. Part way there. And then you might be able to gradually take some further steps. Solve a different but related problem. Delegate. Hang it. Get someone else to do it if you can. And maybe if you're in a more senior position, you can do that. That's a privilege. Ask for help, take a break, go for a walk. If you get bored as well, then that's going to block you. Learning needs to be fun or engaging. And if you can get people to argue, they will think, and they will keep thinking, and they will learn stuff. If you can astonish people with a magic trick, or do something with some code that people hadn't ever thought of before, that will get them engaged. And it'll get you engaged as well. So if you come across something as you're reading or listening to a talk that blows your mind, take a photo of the slide, make yourself a little note. Don't know if you've come across intransitive dice before. The dice at the bottom, they've all got 3 different numbers on. And any one can beat any of the other ones. It's kind of like playing rock, paper, scissors. There's no one thing that's going to be best. I remember coming across these when I was quite young, and it blew my mind. I got so angry at the thought that there wasn't one thing that was best in a collection of things. I learned a profound mathematical lesson there, and I could still remember the visceral fury of, no, that can't be right, and trying to play these dice with my dad several times and going, actually, he is right. My mind is blown. I've got a new worldview. And that's part of the issue about teaching. It involves emotions. You're trying to change someone's worldview and blow their minds. So you need to be mindful of their emotions. And if you're trying to learn, you might find that your assumptions are challenged. You need to be quite humble about that and be able to say, actually, not just someone on the internet was wrong, maybe I was wrong. And if, to the end of your life, you can keep going, I might have got it wrong. There might be more to learn. That's a good thing. That's a beautiful thing. That means there's things worth living for still for the rest of your life. And I hope that at this conference you take something away and you go, my mind's been blown. The world's a bigger, different place. Another way to avoid boredom is gamify things. Give yourself some gold stars. Or even award yourself a certificate. I know I've shared this before on some slides. Some of you will have heard some of my previous talks. Some of you won't, that's cool. But I did a PhD in machine learning stuff a while ago. There's a little hobby I've just kept up to date with some algorithms. And it's nice to have a little project to play with. And my first technical talk, I printed off a certificate, and the people who thought that I proved I could comb my way out of a paper bag. And I've done that using various AI algorithms. Jens was talking about doing an artificial life type simulation. I've done one of those and just made blobs move across the screen and look as though they're going out of a paper bag. So I've got a signed certificate, and once in a while when I feel stuck, I can glance up at the wall and go, yeah, but I did one good thing once. Woo. So take a moment to just be pleased with yourself, your achievements, and be silly. Award yourself a certificate. Give yourself a gold star. Go for a nice walk. Have some fun. So I've talked about trying different problems and new problems. And my Learn C++ by Example book, several of the chapters in there are some games that you can go away and play with. And I think if you are trying to mentor some people in C++ or another language, if you can come out with something like rock, paper, scissors, and my book had a game, higher, lower card game. If you think through what might be involved with that, in terms of C++, you might have to start talking about the spaceship operator or similar. Just bring in so many different things. And if you just do one code example showing one feature, you'll miss stuff. But go away and try and write a card game of higher, lower. I'm sure you can think of 15 different ways to do it, and you will cover so much of the language by playing with it. Go for it. Now, I've skated around this. I've talked about feelings and emotions. But yeah, just be mindful that as you're trying to learn, as you're trying to teach or train, there are some emotions going on. And if someone's learning, you might be blowing their mind, and they might get angry. I've had occasions where people have pretty much been shouting at me, going, no, that can't be right because I'll prove it. And particularly for coding stuff, it's much easier than being a maths teacher to some 14-year-olds. You just step back and go on then. Have you tried this test? Let them try it. But they might even swear at you. Start thumping the desk. And the first few times that happened to me, I was like, I've made someone angry. Well, now I've got calmer. You're like, of course I have. I've challenged their assumptions, and it can be quite frightening seeing somebody blow up and start swearing. But just focus their mind on some test cases. And that's okay. And they will calm down, and they might go, oh. That might be all you get from them. They might not say sorry, but if they just go, oh, you know that you've got a message across. That's hard to deal with as a trainer. And you're allowed to be angry if you're learning. It's okay to go, I don't get that. Can you re-explain it? Do that. That's how you learn. Teachers are supposed to encourage people. That means you need to give them courage. And that's really hard. But we're dealing with feeling stuff. And we've all gone into this industry, I guess. Some of us may be slightly autistic or similar. We don't like this interaction or this humaning feeling stuff. But we can get there by coming out with some technical examples and find clear ways to communicate. And yet, don't forget, progress, if you're trying to learn, it's often non-linear. I know that I've gone, I can't do this. I could do it last week. My brain stopped working. I've learned to go, all right, I didn't get enough sleep last night. Give me a moment. If you're teaching or training, never say to someone, or being a mentor, don't say, you could do this last week. What's wrong with you? Because there might be something wrong. You might not have had enough sleep. You might be frightening them. So be mindful of your words, but you know that. So let's not dwell on the point too much. I talked about asking questions being a good way to learn and needing the confidence to do that. And going, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try this instead. I'm going to bend and break the rules. I think one thing that humans have that the AIs don't have is that what-if thing. I said this, that counterfactual thing. I want to do something different. No, I don't want to do that maths question. I want to try it with these numbers. No, I don't want to do this in C++. I'm going to do this in Rust instead. That's okay. At this point, I I'm personally thinking loads about, can machines actually learn? But I won't tell you about the background CPUs going on in my head. I read a lot of sci-fi. Anyone come across William Gibson? Statistically, there were going to be some hands. So agency is the second of a trilogy he's not finished yet. The first was The Peripheral, which I think's been on Netflix. And I really like the agency book. There's an AI in it called Eunice, no last name. While she's at it, she'd like to say, she's nobody's property, she's not a product, she pays her own way, she's globally distributed. And that's how she sees her citizenship. It feels like she's a person. And then somebody says to one of the main characters, so you trust whoever's in control of this thing. Its capabilities currently unknown. Think LLMs, right? Because somebody convinced you it was AI, told you should trust it. So, some big questions there. I think if you just pause on that one for a moment, that can teach you loads about teaching and learning. And you aren't just feeding a computer system information that it will then spew back by rote. You're trying to achieve something else. What you're actually doing if you're teaching someone is not just encouraging them, but encouraging their free will and giving them that agency. And I think that Gen AI doesn't have agency, will never have agency, but I do think we aren't sure, we don't know its capabilities yet. Just leave that there, that should be over a coffee discussion. Read sci-fi, chat to me about sci-fi. If you're teaching, you're trying to encourage someone to find their own path through life. And pause. So I've talked about feelings and agencies. Let's talk about how we actually learn. I'm going to start pulling in some of the AI stuff as we go. One thing that humans have got is a body and hormones and chemicals surging through, and that affects how we behave. We're hungry, or we're tired, or we're nervous, or we have some dopamine because, whoa, we're about to get a bing because we do all right in Duolingo today, and then we start looking for the feel-good moments, which can reinforce our learning. And there's a type of AI called reinforcement learning that's playing on that, which obviously doesn't involve the chemicals. I gave a talk here last year about how that works. So lots of AI algorithms are based on human and animal learning, but they're different. Where do we learn? We can learn from books. I think there's some anecdotal evidence that people have stopped reading technical books. And I think that's a shame, but I understand because I didn't read my first technical book from end to end till I'd been programming for about 4 or 5 years as a career. I'd look things up in a reference book, but I couldn't get my head around the idea of reading a technical book. Sit down with a comic, love that. Sit down with a sci-fi book, sets my imagination off. Sit down with a C++ book, nah, not much plot, not very good characters. But I got a copy of Accelerated C++. I won it in a raffle at ACU years ago. And I thought, because I've won it, and it was worth like £30 at the time, which was more than a week's food money. Well, I'm going to do the right thing. I sit down and read it. I read a bit and went, didn't know that. Really? Tried it at work the next day. Didn't have a computer at home. Went, interesting. And I'd kept scrappy bits of paper. I'd written down, don't believe that. Don't get that bit. Really? And I've still got the scrappy bits of paper. And it took me the best part of a year to read because I kept having to stop, try stuff. And I went, oh, hang on. No, it said that on the last chapter, so I had to reread it. So I didn't read it in order. Bear in mind, I said, I think I'm dyslexic, so, which is why comics are great, more pictures. Learned that if I used a bookmark, just a plain bit of paper, then my eyes weren't bouncing around the pages. And then I could scribble my questions down as I went. When I got to the end of the book, which had taken me months, the sense of achievement was amazing. I felt good. Woo! But also, I'd read a book and I'd learnt loads, and I realised that I didn't really know very much C++. I could get away with it at work, but there was loads to learn and loads I'd misunderstood. So that did me good. So maybe there's another thing. One challenge, ask a question in the talk. Another challenge, if you've never read a technical book, do it. Argue with it. Write on a bit of paper. Don't read it in order. Hang it with the last chapter first if you want. It's your book. You can do what you want. And it's not a storybook, so it doesn't matter if you do it in random order. That's cool. There are loads of online courses as well. Various YouTubes of technical talks. Don't try and read the whole internet. We've already seen the XKCD. Sometimes people on the internet are wrong. Maybe use your network or people here. Listen to recommendations. And the same for books. Because some technical books are a bit rubbish and they're a bit expensive. So look at the Meeting CPP website and see the books that Jens has recommended. Or talk to someone first. Use your network. Can you learn from AI? Maybe, but also it might be wrong. I've talked about how to read a book. Just try it. Now I should probably explain a bit more about my title properly. I've talked about asking questions and how it's really good, both as you're learning or teaching, or even with that Gen AI going, can you explain your reasoning, please? That's where we learn things. So, okay, another quote from another sci-fi. Neil Stephenson fans in the room. That's the same as the William Gibson people. I spot a correlation. The difference between stupid and intelligent people, and this is true whether or not they're well educated, is that intelligent people can handle subtlety. They're not baffled by ambiguous or contradictory situations. In fact, they expect them and apt to become suspicious when things seem overly straightforward. So use that as encouragement. If you are listening to something or learning about something, and you go, yeah, actually, it depends, that's a good thing. If you go, it's always better to follow the standard rather than do something else. That's people dictating rules. There's always subtleties. Never say never and never say always. It depends. So the reason I spelt stupid wrong in my title was as a thought experiment since Jen's invited me to do this. I thought, I'm going to try not to use the word stupid for the next 6 months. And that's been really interesting. Because stupid kind of means something's not intelligent, and you can't fix that. And actually, deep down, I think everybody is intelligent. We're just intelligent in different ways, and we've got different skill sets. One thing I've swapped the word stupid for is ignorant, which sounds insulting as well, really. But that's subtly different. Someone's ignorant, that means they don't know about this yet. So, just a slight distinction. Try as a thing yourself. Try not using the word stupid for the rest of the year. And see if that changes your thinking slightly. Or resort to spelling stupid differently. Another important thing about stupid questions is it doesn't just help you learn. So I gave a talk at CPP online last year, I think, about how do you remove negative numbers from a collection. I could see 2 or 3 different ways using the like remove if algorithms and then resizing. And then there's erase if. And then, well, computer science would do a recursive version. And then I came out of about 15, 20 different ways. So if you can find yourself a simple question, a C++ being C++, there's more than one way to do things, you might have got yourself your first ever talk. And you'll learn loads and loads of different idioms and approaches, and that'll make you better at your trade. One question you see loads on Reddit and Stack Overflow and the likes is, why can't I hash include a CPP file? Breaking news, kids, you can, but you might not want to. But loads of people keep asking that question, and if a question crops up loads, that's often a sign of a kind of general ignorance. I don't know how we deal with that one, but that one crops up a lot. And then there's a whole accepted wisdom. It's accepted wisdom that you can't use exceptions in embedded code, right? Who's seen Khalil's talk about enabling exceptions in the embedded world and how it actually made things sometimes, not always, safer and quicker? And he'd originally taken on board that perceived wisdom that we can't do this. Never say never. If someone says you can't do this, one of his students kept saying, why not? And wouldn't let it drop. So well done, that student. As a whole community, due to one student going, yeah, but why not, sir? Lots of times. We've now learnt something. So ask those questions. If somebody says, no, well, you can't do it like that, go, why not? And then all of us might learn from this. Well, I set myself a silly question. How do you code your way out of a paper bag? And I found several ways, and I'm brewing another one for another year. A recent stupid question I've seen is, which is the second best language? I've seen people claim that C++ is the second best language. I think Bjarne said that recently, because you could use it for almost anything. I've seen people say Python's the second best language. And that's a kind of way to have a discussion and go for the jugular and say, what's the best language? It's obviously Rust or something. That's obviously fighting talk. So I just toned it down a bit by saying, what's the second best language? And then there's the other thing, and AIs can't do, is how do you know you know? If you use ChatGPT or something and say, are you sure? It almost always goes, no, actually, of course, I've made this mistake, and then makes it worse. But that's because it's been set up to do that, to be supposedly humble. If you ask a person, are you sure? Ask yourself, are you sure? Are you sure you can't use exceptions in an embedded environment? You sure you can't hash include a CPP file? If you're reading a book or you're learning a new subject, you go, actually, have I learned this now? Do I understand it yet? Just kind of go meta and watch yourself as you go. Maybe find ways to assess your knowledge. And then we could have a whole talk about how you assess people. Obviously, multiple choice questions are easy to get machines to mark. But then you can't do that bit of showing you're working, and the teacher can't see where you're coming from. But you might be able to do online assessment, or play with a CPP quiz online just to test your knowledge. That's a good starting place. If you can explain something to someone else, that's a good sign you've learned something. And if you can explain it to a computer, then you really know what you're doing, right? A new quote for us. Well, let's talk a little bit more about teaching. So my dad started life as a secondary school maths teacher, as I did. He went on to teach at a teacher training college. I was usually rubbish at art at school, another subject I was no good at, but I drew one picture once of my dad, which actually looked like him. So that's the other thing. A lot of times people just show you the stuff that worked rather than the things that didn't work. That's one way to encourage yourself. But because he was at a teacher training college, I got to chat to him a bit about how you teach, and I went through teacher training college as well. And one thing he always said, and I told you about the intransitive dice he showed me that still sticks in my mind now. He said one thing that helps people learn is that getting them to argue. A good arguer is like a good teacher. This isn't a quote from him, it's a quote from an online article. A good teacher explains clearly, motivates interest, and that can be by setting a puzzle or a problem that flies in the face of perceived wisdom or shakes those assumptions and gives people something to play with. But it involves feelings. And it takes patience and willingness to speak to people where they are. If you explain something and people can't do it afterwards, again, you can't say what's wrong with you. What you've learnt then is you haven't explained in a way they've understood. And it might be they're starting from a different place. It might be they've done loads of Java before and there's not that baseline understanding about what C++ is doing or something like that. So you might need to step to where they are and go, oh, well, show me how you do it in Java. And you go, right, now I can see why we've got this impedance mismatch. And like I said, just multiple choice is easy to mark. One thing in terms of teaching, and actually like in the software environment as well, it's like code reviews. It's just chat through what you've done afterwards and go, that whole, are you sure it's right? Talk about it. Because in software, that 80% isn't good enough most of the time. And actually need to talk to each other. And if you're teaching children, a similar thing works. You said, okay, let's talk this through. Which ones do you think are right? Which ones weren't you sure about? Which did you find hardest? Mark each other's work, talk to each other. We're in this together. That can be worth doing. So you can use code reviews as a learning opportunity. If you don't let junior staff review senior staff's code, you're missing out on an opportunity there. Because they might ask, why are you doing it like that? Learn more about your company guidelines or similar. So, yeah, we're in this together. And part of the assessment is the feedback. So I guess I need to start wrapping up now. And we're towards the end. If someone's only got 80% of things right, it's very easy to go, well, that was wrong, that was wrong, that was wrong. It's really important to go, but these bits were right. So even if you're going to reject a PR, it's useful to say which bits are good. Because people's feelings are involved. And you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as an English phrase goes. Say what's good. Say thank you. Say well done sometimes. Say Mr. Semicolon there, or that's going to crash at runtime because. But point out the good bits. If you're teaching. If you're learning, step back. Give yourself a certificate. Just go, all right, I've got 99% of things wrong in my vocab test, but I did learn one word, so I learned one thing. So be positive as well. So, all right, let's now move on to where training happens. We can learn here at a conference. And we're in a privileged, honoured position to be here. And hello to the people online. It's great, Jen, to set this up so it's more accessible to more people. It's often cheaper to come to a conference and get training in, or go to the workshops. So maybe have a word with people at work if they've sponsored you. Just say positive feedback. Say how useful it's been, if it has been useful. And see if you can manage to schedule some time in for training or learning at work. Or maybe you've been dumped with mentoring someone and you don't know how. Don't forget, give them some agency. If they say, oh, I've been trying to listen to this podcast and I don't get it, well, do it as a group exercise and nudge some time for it. Don't get dumped with being told, oh, you need to do brown bag at lunchtime. If this matters to you, give me some time on Friday afternoon during office hours. Push back. Try saying no sometimes. Or what if we did this instead? And if you're not up there and able to tug at purse strings to get people to go to conferences, just ask. Don't be afraid to say, if you're running something yourself, don't be afraid to say, I don't know how to do this. Let's workshop it, do this together. Or even ask your company if they've got budget to buy a book. They might not be willing to pay out for conferences or workshops, but it might blow 30, 40 euros on a book for you. Ask. All right, let's round up with, we've talked about how we can learn and teach. Can machines learn? Who thinks LLMs are thinking? No one, hooray! There's a subset of AI called machine learning. Now, the sense in which the word learning got used there was the algorithm would figure out a strategy, originally playing drafts, and then we've seen incidents of other ball games like chess and Go happening. Now, had it learnt to play the game? Well, in a sense, yes. It could end up winning. Had it learnt anything? Well, it just had some weights adjusted in some kind of lookup table, or it found a way to compress data and work out what was most likely. I've been reading far too much recently. Now I've got the hang of reading. I've got too many books in the house and too much to read. But hey, some people who've been working on the LLMs are claiming that they are intelligent, that they're showing signs of artificial general intelligence, which is a word that's raised its head recently. If it's a subject that you're interested in, it's worth going away and reading some of the papers. When AI was first introduced as a phrase, it just meant building a machine that was intelligent. But then we had to unpack what intelligence meant, and we never quite got to the bottom of that. Now we've got loads of AI or machine learning algorithms that can play Go, that can drive cars, etc., etc., and actually do some cool things like translation for you. That's great. We're saying, oh, well, we've built a system, a computer system that does a specific task. That's not intelligence. So we've now got this phrase, AGI, artificial general intelligence. That means, can we build a robot or computer system that'll be able to do anything? Some of the people are saying that some of the LLMs are showing signs of that because they set them up to be a chatbot. And one of the earlier ones, I think it was a Microsoft one of the guys working on it said, oh, can you translate this into Hungarian for me? And it hadn't been written to do translation. It had been designed to be a chatbot. But it had access to all of Wikipedia. And after a bit of a strange interaction, it came out of the correct translation. So that set him off on the train of thought of, I've written a system to do one thing, chatbot, and actually it can do more general things. So there are people out there who are seeing some of these LLMs as showing signs of intelligence. I'm trying that perspective on things, and I'm reading a lot about this. But I'm not convinced they are. I think the thing that's missing is that agency that I talked about. They'll respond to you. And we're not quite sure what they're capable of doing. That example of the early one doing the translation was, okay, didn't expect that. But they don't have agency, and that's a good thing, right? Yes, phew. You'll start seeing things like ANI now for artificial narrow intelligence with tasks that can only spot tumours in scans or only do one specific thing. And maybe you just need a different phrase for it, but back in the 50s, that would have been called AI, and fine. And people are now dreaming about a SI, artificial superintelligence, whereby the machines rise up and they end up being more intelligent than humans are. Maybe, but I like my sci-fi, so I need to switch from positive to negative once in a while to consider both viewpoints. So, like I said, people are saying some stuff. And I need to talk about what intelligence means. I can't define it, but that's by the by. Yeah, and I said people were coming out of stuff. Who's seen this quote? It might be that today's large neural networks are slightly conscious. I think consciousness is binary, myself. Either is or isn't, and I don't think they are. And of course, the Turing test was invented to try and sidestep the idea of intelligence. So Turing wrote the paper about the imitation game. It was just like, if you can't spot whether it's a machine or a person, it might as well be a person or intelligent. That's because he was avoiding defining intelligence. We talk about LLMs as stochastic parrots. Heard that? So it's just parroting back stuff, but probabilistically. And some of the people designing them are saying, actually, your brain works like that. And as I've been thinking about it, I've observed, particularly writing my book, I go, okay, write down the, and go, right, got the first word, and then spew forth, and then tinker with it till it sounds better. And a lot of times when I'm speaking, I've started to feel like I am doing that LLM thing. You go, and when you get the first word, you just start waffling, but you kind of randomly walk through it. But sometimes I've got a clear idea in my head, and I think first about how to express it. And I don't always do it with words. Sometimes I do it by pointing, waving, drawing a picture, coming out of a code example. Not sure. And there were some early thought experiments about how do you know someone knows? If you come across the Chinese room argument about whether something is intelligent or not, well, someone's got a system of rules. They get past a written note in Chinese but can't speak Chinese. Look up the rules, pick up a note that follows the rules, pass it back out. The person outside the room might think there's a person inside the room who understands Chinese, but they don't. But maybe you're just following rules. Maybe how you've learnt nursery rhymes and language means you don't really understand language, you're just using it to communicate somehow. If I say red, have you got the same image in your head as me? Some people don't get images in their head. Some people have synesthesia and go strawberries and get the taste rather than see the colour. How do we know what's really going on? We don't. I don't. But despite people saying the LLMs are slightly conscious, lots of people still say, look, they're computational systems, they do not learn. So I think it's an unanswered question at the moment as to whether LLMs are intelligent. I think there's a lot of evidence they aren't. I think we're intelligent, and I think we can learn, but we all learn differently. So think about how you learn. Maybe, as your final step, try giving a talk. Then you'll learn what you don't know, and you'll learn even more. You can use machines and AI to learn. I see people learning things from vibe coding. I worry if you do that to learn a new language and don't get any feedback from somebody who actually knows the language. But that's the same as copying stuff off Stack Overflow. Conceptually, at least, it might be wrong. You can get a machine to mark things for you, maybe. Or maybe that's like doing fuzz testing on your code, getting the machine to find mistakes in it. But fuzz testing is more guided and precise than the stochastic parrot random spew. And yet, there are loads of examples about people using tools to learn from. That little Yoto thing, really cool. Saw an eight-year-old giving a talk at a Python conference this year about how she'd learnt Python to practice her vocab. Look, the LLMs hallucinate. You can use it to auto-complete things where you know what you're up to. I've recently got into Hang It, just using Vim and command line for everything, not even using an IDE, just gone properly old school, because I'm weird. Why not? Jen's blogged about doing some vibe coding, and one quote has pulled out of that is, you need to know what you're doing to use AI. Lots of people say they're using LLMs to generate boilerplate code. Here's a call to arms: don't. Yeah, all right, you can if you want, but we used to write wizards and cookie cutters and things, and people have Herb's talked about meta-classes to do some of the boilerplate stuff for us. Those approaches generate correct code. LLMs are sometimes wrong. And there is a sustainability environmental question. If you can't face writing the boilerplate code, go meta. Write some code to generate the code you need. Share it with each other. Save the planet. And make sure your code's right. Please. Just saying, it's useful with boilerplate. Yes, but let's stop doing that. So, just round up with some challenges for you. I know I've overrun slightly. Ask some questions. Try something you think you can't do. Read a book. Write an article. I edit Overloads magazine. Share with me if you want. Give a talk. And end with another quote from New Model Army song. Some of us are old, some of us are young, or whatever. We're in this together. Let's leave here as vagabonds or children or prisoners forever. Pulses raging, eyes full of wonder. Recapture that joy, that sparkle, and you'll keep learning. I've written some books. I've run over time. Somebody should have stopped me 5 minutes ago. I'm very sorry. Thank you for listening. Yeah, I think Manning's doing a bundle of C++ books, but with a discount for people here.
Yeah, indeed, and they do. I have an announcement about that later.
We've got time for questions.
I do have a lot of questions. If you have other questions, microphones are open. Forgot my phone, so I need to use a laptop. Just generally reaching out to the stream if you want to upload questions, that makes it easier to choose. But we have a question on. No, we don't. So we have a question by Honey. Do you think our learning fashion changes as we age? If so, how do we identify our learning method?
I can't talk for Honey, I can't talk for you, I can talk for me. When I was younger, I didn't read technical books, now I do. I've got a wider network of people I can talk to. I can see myself getting slower to take on board new ideas. Part of that is because I've got more aware of what sort of questions to ask. And part of it is because your brain does slow down. I can see things I used to be really good at and really quick with, particularly mathsy type things, where I can still do them, but I'm much slower than I used to be. Yeah, you change because we are hardware, wetware, whereas things like LLMs aren't. Yeah, your body changes, your brain changes, you change. And sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not.
I can't help but keep thinking about the emotional part of your talk. Like you had that side which said students are allowed to get angry. Teachers are not allowed to get angry. Well, I've spent some years teaching, and I must admit that I often got angry at students, and they often trigger something in me. They're disrespectful. So how do you deal with that?
You need a supportive team around you. What I meant was just poker face. But you will need to let off steam afterwards. You might need to rant at somebody. You might need a mechanism where you can send that child to the head teacher's office. And let's face it, children in the UK have been caught carrying knives and teachers have ended up in hospital. So you are in danger sometimes. If you're at work, hopefully that's not happening, and there's no head teacher that you can send somebody to go and sit outside the head teacher's office when they've been naughty. Yes, I'm not saying you can't have feelings, but just don't, when you're teaching, try not to blow up. And if you can feel yourself doing that, maybe you need to take time out as well. And yes, it was really hard. It is really emotional for both sides. But try and avoid stock phrases like, "What's wrong with you? Stop being so stupid." That makes things more volatile. Have some different stock phrases. "Hey, that's interesting. Let's discuss that tomorrow." Finish this first. Just different stock phrases. You need help doing this. It's hard. It's probably harder for the teachers than the students. Like I said, students just pick their way through it and half the time ignore you and think about their own things anyway. If you are doing training or mentoring, you will get exhausted. You need a shoulder to cry on or a punch bag once in a while. Fact.
Well, yeah. Actually, about this exhaustion, I once asked Scott Myers when he was here, because I was like, he must have some secrets, but he was like, no, even every teacher I met is like, yeah, teaching a course is exhausting. And you shouldn't underestimate that when you want to start teaching. But actually, I have a question from online. Akash asks, are there some of the C++ books you would suggest someone willing to get started in developing the habit of reading a technical book from cover to cover?
Oh, that's not fair. I mean, it depends. I still really like accelerated C++, but it's out of date. It doesn't cover the modern standards. My guiding heuristic is, if I can't fit a book in a handbag, this handbag's far too small, I'm not going to read it. Since lockdown, I've mostly been wearing jeans and t-shirt and not carrying handbags around, so I've gone for no more than 250 pages. Don't bother. The old K&R-C programming language is still one of my favourite books. It's not about C++. It's less than 200 pages. It definitely fits in almost all of my handbags. And it'll get you thinking straight. It is out of date by miles, but it's really well written. If you do want an introductory C++ book, watch this space, and hopefully I'll finish going through the feedback, and that should be due out in maybe March next year. That breaks my rules. That's going to be about 325 pages. See what the feedback says. Ask your friends. Don't ask me. I don't know you. It depends what you're into. Maybe just read a comic. Write a book yourself. Don't know. Can't answer that one. Sorry.
Hello. Thanks for the talk. The previous asker here in person, the thing I think that you wanted to point out is that as someone who's learning, you want to get encouraged, but also for the teachers, I find it very helping to try to change perspective. What is the situation of the students? What is the next step they want to learn? And you will not be successful in placing yourself in the situation, but rethinking it with the course material will help to dump it down and make it step by step and not skip a step. So, but the main question I want to ask here is, are you sure with the artificial intelligence? You said you read a lot, but what I hear is that we are not very good at defining intelligence, and we changed the definition since we got ChatGPT. So are we really sure they're intelligent or not, or are we not really understanding what kind of intelligence they have?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm reading a book at the moment. I can't remember the author's name. It's just called What is Intelligence? Because that hits the nail on the head. And like I said, the Turing test was sidestepping this back in the 50s, because that's an impossible question to answer. And actually, when you're talking to someone, discussing something with them, you don't know whether they've understood you or not, really. They can give the impression they do. Now, that's not even as far as talking about intelligence. So you can't even be sure you're managing to communicate clearly with someone. And I don't think we know what intelligence means. We used to think that animals definitely don't show any signs of intelligence. And I went, oh, actually they are using tools. Okay, so maybe it's language that makes humans different. And then we go, no, animals, they use language as well. I think and it's particularly a Western viewpoint, and some other worldviews differ slightly. We've always felt we tend to write and think as though humans are different. And what makes us different is intelligence. We can use tools, we can use language. And we keep moving the goalposts. And maybe we need to look at some other cultures and change our perspective a bit. And maybe intelligence doesn't really mean anything, and we need different ways of assessing things. So perhaps Turing was right. Yeah, that's nail on the head. I can't answer that question. It's a great question, though. What do you think? Let's chat after, we're running late.
Would we even be aware and recognize a super intelligent AI if it was? There was the famous and total interaction between Charlie Chaplin and Albert Einstein. You know it?
I've not come across that, no.
That Albert Einstein complimented Charlie Chaplin, said, even though he's not saying a word, everyone understands him.
Right.
And Charlie Chaplin said to Albert Einstein, you are much better off. Nobody understands you, but everybody respects you.
Right. Cool.
Thank you for great talk. I might want to follow on it a bit, because like defining intelligence without putting any structure to it is impossible. Because we can identify some structure of our human intelligence. It has several layers and so forth and so forth. Maybe we could go that direction if we want to explore intelligence and try to give it some structure and some maybe competing elements. The brain is incredibly complex. It's not one thing. We have many parts competing with each other every second. What's your thoughts on that?
This is a big topic, and this might have to be a do-over lunch. But a high-level thing, some people are writing and saying, well, some of the deep learning is similar, particularly the recurrent neural networks that are doing that feedback thing is similar to how brains work. But your brain gets flooded by chemicals from your entire system, and there are people who've written that you can't have an intelligent machine if it doesn't have something like a body. It can't be software only, it needs that hard side. I don't know. Let's chat over lunch. It's a great point.
Well. Yeah. I recently was reminded and thought about in the old days of the internet on the forums. I've had in my signature the quote, and I don't know if it's of like who I'm quoting, or is it like something I came up with, but intelligence is an illusion of mankind, because we can't really define it. And I don't know, like you studied math, I don't think we can come up with something which really defines it. But anyways, there's a different question, which is not about intelligence, but about a C++ trainer, Guillaume asked the question, and he often struggles evaluating what's the retention rate of a given lesson. And it's hard to build up relevant courses as previous lessons are a precondition for the next and so on. Any advices?
Yeah, no, it's really hard. And particularly if you get invited in as a trainer, you don't know your audience, you don't know what you're going to walk into. Keep yourself notes on what's worked, what hasn't worked. Watch the timing. That's a really hard thing to get right. I mean, I've overrun this morning. I was looking at my watch to begin with, but then I got absorbed in myself. Watch the timing. If you think, oh, I'll be able to get through this in 5 minutes, and it takes you 10 minutes, that's telling you something. And clock what questions have been asked. Maybe write some of them down afterwards, and you'll be able to refine your training materials and realize, actually, no, I can't get through all this. Let's just slow off. Or maybe you can set things up, differentiated learning, they call it in education lingo, with a kind of fast track for people who want to run ahead and try harder stuff, but a few more examples for people to go through and go, at the end of this lesson, I need everybody to be able to do this challenge. But there's this extra thing if people need it. So, yeah, some of it's about the timing. Some of it is you don't know your audience. Or maybe you do know your audience, but you don't know how they're going to respond to the material, because each time you teach something, it's different. Yeah, difficult, but keep some notes, do science.
I'm just wondering, do you have any advice how to cope with imposter syndrome when teaching? There's always this question, there might be someone who's better at explaining that, who's deeper into that topic, and that can be really frightening.
Yes, it absolutely is. Okay, so assume there is somebody who's better than explaining. Fine, they're not in the room. Or maybe they are. Maybe one of the people you're teaching to will be able to explain it better. You can watch, if you can see people whispering amongst themselves. It's okay, hey, you, silence. Find a way to walk around the room and you might go, we're having an interesting chat here. Let's all huddle around and let's discuss it and let them do the talking instead. Actually, something that imposter syndrome can do is make you just totally freeze up and you can't speak anymore. But it's okay to then let the people in the room talk to each other for a moment. Or one of them come up to the front and show you how they did it. And then get them to talk amongst themselves if you have that complete block where you are totally rabbits in headlight, can't speak. But find some stock phrases to get you out of the trouble. Are we having fun? Would you like to try a new example? Just find a word to stop that frozen up thing, but there's some stuff you can do to get over it. But be kind to yourself afterwards and go, well, at least I've survived the hour. Maybe someone's learned something. And if there is an exam or something at the end, or they've got to do a presentation to a customer, if it goes all right, write down in your diary, I did okay. Print yourself a certificate to look at once in a while. Give yourself some positive feedback. Yes, some things that go wrong. And if you think you're the best teacher in the world, you're not, and you just leave now, mate. You're all right. It's okay. You're doing okay. Tell yourself that.
Thanks.
Right, I think we probably are over time now, are we? Another question?
Well, I think we have one more question left.
Okay.
I mean, it depends on the time you answer. Then we might have another one.
All right.
So, Hani asks, I think note-taking is also an art. Can you share some thoughts on note-taking? How can we make it easier to find and reflect notes over time?
We're all different, and you'll change things. As I've got older, I write more words down. When I was younger, I used to just doodle. And I've rediscovered that recently. And I drew up a doodle I wrote in a maths lecture, and I put it up on the wall in a little clip frame. And each time I see that, it reminds me of the set theory lecture I was at. So What works for you might change. It might be just doodling works. It might be a series of notes works. I've noticed some people here, like having a little structured document on the laptop or a tablet, typing things up. I personally remember things better if I do them with pen and paper. That might be when I was brought up or my age. Figure out what works for you. Something I've seen people do loads is sketchnoting. So they'll have a blank bit of paper, they put the title, and then they're just doing little thought bubbles of things that crop up, and maybe do little swirly patterns around the significant things. And then maybe take a photo of it and share it on social media. So play with different mediums, play with different structures, and ask yourself the question, am I doing this to remember some specific technical details? Or am I doing this to farm my imagination? In which case, maybe you want to write down some of your aside thoughts you've had about something completely different. Yeah, it depends what you're trying to achieve. But play with different mediums, play with different structures. And everyone's different on this, so do what works for you.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. So, one more question, and we are at lunch. With so many new technologies and AI tools emerging, do you think it's better for developers today to stay deeply focused on mastering one area, or to branch out and stay flexible across newer fields like AI and large language models?
Yes. No. Or as Nico said yesterday, maybe. Look, right, the different business areas, and the answer might be different for a lot of those. For some of them, you do need some people with some deep tech knowledge. Though you can then get pigeonholed and miss out on some of the new stuff that's going on. Something that has worked for me, I started doing embedded stuff and then moved on to doing things in finance, so that was more networky stuff. And I learned about the business area I was in, which was useful. I got really good at some of the embedded things and making things really quick and really small. And then when I moved into the more networky stuff, I ended up just writing loads of tests for people, but I made the software better. But I made a point of learning Python as well. So I'd got some deep, but then I did some breadth. And then I gradually learned some other languages. I think one thing that a lot of programmers have said is if you learn a second language, it gives you more ways to look at your first language. So that is one common theme. There's nothing wrong with doing an in-depth thing, and people definitely need to be able to do that. It suits some people to do that and stay doing that, and other people like to flit around and try different things. But yeah, one common thing is learning a second language can be quite useful. That's all I've got.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Listening.